everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unboxed. Today, I'm your host, Pauline, and we're going to be talking about Black people creating opportunities for other Black people to emerge in the business world. Okay, guys, so let us know what you guys think in general about Black people creating opportunities for other Black people.
I feel like it's, don't mean to jump the gun there.
No, go ahead.
I feel like it's very necessary because literally, if we don't do it, no one else is going to take the opportunity or initiative to do it for us. So, I mean, we shouldn't be waiting for somebody just start.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Yeah, and one thing that I should have mentioned is we'll be referencing people like Issa Rae and Jordan Peele, who are at the forefront of that right now in the entertainment industry. So Issa Rae said she was rooting for everyone Black. So what do you guys think about that, specifically saying that I'm just here for Black people and that's it, pretty much? Do you think that that cuts out other people and, in terms of reverse racism, and how are other races supposed to feel about this?
If you think about it from a creative perspective, think about how Issa Rae came up, right? Her claim to fame is being on a show that really speaks to what it's like to be a young Black woman trying to make it in the entertainment industry, right? Mm-hmm. So for her, that's the narrative she's built, and that's the success that she's attained, right? It has been in that specific genre, in that specific area, right? So I think for her to say that, it's true to herself because that's what she sees, and that's what she wants to represent. She built a show, Insecure, that's very much predicated on the idea of being a young Black woman trying to succeed in her professional career, right? And that translates into the entertainment as well, because that's the story that's authentic to herself, right? So her saying that she's rooting for Black people is because it took her a very long time to achieve that success as a Black woman, right? And if you look at the cast is also filled with Black people. So she's just radiating the same reality that got her to where she is today, right? Because having more such spaces increases the doors of opportunity and the doors of access for other young Black creatives to then get the opportunities to express themselves, right? Because why was Insecure such a big hit? It's because it spoke to the experiences of a young professional that was of color, right? How many shows were like that on TV? Maybe not enough. And so I guess TV and entertainment is meant to reflect what's around you, right? The world that we live in, right? So I think Issa Rae tapped into that, and for her, she's realized that that's what, I guess, resonates most with her, and that's what makes her unique. So she's gonna always, I think, be an advocate for that, which makes sense.
I think for her case specifically, she was able to come in and fill in a space where there weren't enough diverse stories being told about Black people, where you have the Tyler Perry's who was telling this very one-dimensional story about the Black experience. A lot of female characters in his shows are either very crazy or or very stereotypical Black women. And there weren't really a lot of other outlets or other people who were telling good enough stories. So she was able to come in and tell a very nuanced story about this is just Black people existing and being normal, having relationship issues, going through different experiences in the workplace. They're just normal, regular, multi-dimensional characters, right? And so people really connected with that. And I think that also is a reason why it was good for her to be intentional about bringing in Black writers, bringing in Black producers, bringing in Black directors. Because in a lot of other productions that, feature any Black characters, they're one-dimensional or they're just not, they don't tell a good enough story about the Black experience. And so with her, she was able to tell a story which connected and became a good product. And that's how I think she's been able to win all these awards, and her show has been renewed on HBO multiple times, and she's doing well in everything because she's able to tell a full story about Black people in a way which is still funny and relatable. So.
Yeah. Could we go back to the Tyler Perry thing? Because initially, years ago, when I first watched Tyler Perry, I actually liked Medea and all that stuff. But then, recently, I've been thinking, I feel like it's a bit problematic because also with men too, I feel the way he portrays Black men, sometimes Diary of a Mad Black Woman, all that stuff, it's about this guy that essentially mistreated his wife, and then it was only after he became paralyzed that's when he realized he needed her. So I think those kind of stereotypes, they're quite problematic, but then at the same time, maybe he was like exaggerating it to get people's attention.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Tyler Perry is funny. It's funny you brought up Tyler Perry because I was thinking about that as well. It's like Tyler Perry is one of those people where absolutely his characters, the caricatures and all that, but he's an enigma for me because when he first came out, less about his stories, but just more the fact that he owned his own production company.
Yeah.
He provided opportunities for a lot of actors of color, black people, in that sense. So like I actually respected that side of Tyler Perry. So it's kind of an interesting. He strikes as a dilemma. I'm always have to separate like business and his art, but although it is together in the end of the day. So what you were saying about maybe it first came out it was funny, because sometimes a lot of artists out there they put out some sort of caricature characters to get attention, and then eventually they kind of maybe delve a bit deeper into the art. But I feel like Tyler Perry is just doing the same thing. It's been like 15 years. So I don't think in terms of the art side of it, I'm not a big fan of that, but for what he did in terms of platform, so literally he strikes us a dilemma. Every time even I was talking about Tyler Perry, I was like, oh man, he's an interesting case, you know what I'm saying? But in terms of platform, absolutely. I think it's essential to provide that opportunity and create that platform for black people, because I believe it's, you have an opportunity to get to the door, and there's a lot of challenges that you're facing with any industry, especially typically if you're a person of color, black person, a lot of times you're dealing with like non-black spaces or white spaces and things like that. And I mean, personally, I think it's kind of like a family. It's almost like, if I say black people as my extended family, you have an opportunity, it's my moral obligation to provide opportunities for the family behind me in a sort of way. Not behind but just that comes ahead of me. That being said, it doesn't mean that, we can go into this later, but it doesn't mean that everyone needs to do it. But I think, personally, maybe I'll speak to that. I think there's an obligation to at least be intentional about creating an opportunity for people like me, essentially. What it looks like could be different. And I think this is kind of where sometimes the social media gets a bit crazy, because this person's not doing something for black people, but there might be an intentionality that's behind it that might not necessarily look like what you think it should look like. So anyways, that's it.
I feel like the media is like a very big place where, like, if you're gonna voice a certain way about like a black situation or a black character, like as a performer, I feel like you should be very very careful, and be careful as the way that you voice a black person, because a lot of people, they will not have like a lot of black contacts. So when you watch Madea, you assume that black people are supposed to be like this. So I'm not trying to like criticize him in any way. And like you said, I really appreciated the platform he created to give jobs to other black people. But at the same time, it was kind of like, shooting yourself in one foot. Like, you're doing the right thing, but at the same time still damaging the view of the black population to the masses. So in the long run, was he still doing the good, or is he still helping us out?
Was it?
And that's why I struggle with him, where like I can't watch anything.
I really can't.
I just can't do it. You kind of have to explain that, man. Like, there are a lot of actors and actresses and writers and directors who would not be in the position they're in now to give you what they're doing now that you love without what he did. So how do you work with that? And I also think about he had to do, and that's where it comes into being in an industry which is white dominated and working with an audience which is white dominated. Did he have to do those things to appeal to them and make all that money and then turn around and then open more doors? Where he had to almost fall on his sword in a way, where he's like, I'm gonna just do these terrible stereotypical movies, which I know you're all gonna be entertained by, and make all this money and then open up.
Was he appealing to white people though, doing
I think
that? Really? You were watching that? Because I feel like those, his jokes and stuff, and this, I guess
because
maybe.
when you look at what white directors, the movies they make, or filmmakers, they have the same types of characters, stereotypical black, one-dimensional characters, right? And it's only now that with more black directors coming in, we're seeing more well-rounded characters. So he just did what they were doing, maybe to a more extreme example, but he was doing the same.
I want to touch on something you said there, but I'm going to take this on a bit of a tangent because you said Tyler Perry and Black Panther was shot in his studios. So I want to talk about Foresight a little bit, right? So I think one of the key things to creating opportunities is being able to see beyond the curve. So seeing opportunities before they actually are realized, right? Because I think part of the whole idea of creating opportunities for people is being able to say, okay, we've got a room full of people. You guys have all these different talents. How can I maximize all of these talents, right? Beyond myself or like for the future. Now the thing with Tyler Perry and just generally like Black Panther, which kind of has me concerned, or I think about this a lot, is if you think about it, I believe it's Marvel that owns the Black Panther series. Marvel is run, right, by a bunch of white Jewish men, right? Okay. They're the ones who had the foresight to say we should bankroll this, right? Now hold on, now why is it that it took somebody who's not necessarily black per se to say, you know what, we need a black superhero, and then we're gonna hire a black director who can then take that story and bring it to life? Because if you think about it, Black Panther, right, is a story that resonated with a lot of young kids, irrespective of race and color and background, but in particular the black communities, because it's the first time you saw a superhero being portrayed in that fashion, in the big screen, right? Now, I think it's a bit concerning because we speak about creating opportunities for black people, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that black people are the only people creating opportunities for themselves, right? Obviously, the narrative is like we should be advocating for more collaboration amongst black people. Yeah. However, when I think of the most successful story of last year, Black Panther was bankrolled by a bunch of white producers, right? Who then brought in a black cast, a black director to then give it more authenticity and bring that entire sort of collective spirit behind the movie. But when you think about the returns, right, that movie, I think made 10 times its money, right? It had like $100 or $200 million budget. It made more than 1.5 billion, right? Those returns went to the Jewish studio execs, right, at Marvel. So why did it take them having to see the foresight to see that, as opposed to, you know, a black person saying, you know what, this is the type of movie we need. Maybe it's because they had the platform. That's usually what people would say. Platform is what allowed them the opportunity to do that. But I guess what I'm trying to advocate for, or sort of show, is that it's not only black people creating opportunities for themselves. In many instances, you see a lot of people from other cultures creating opportunities for black people, right, because of platforms they have, right? And that a lot of that has to do with foresight. That's my argument.
Right. So do you think it's a positive or negative thing? Is that what you're doing?
No, I think it's in a way it's a positive because what they're doing is they're giving opportunities. My only concern is why is it that we don't have people of color that are able to then build these sort of machines themselves, right? Because that's really what we're advocating for, is more black-owned production companies that can then do that. Because if you think about the cast, the directors, all of that, all those people are black, right? But ultimately the shareholders are not. So there's a disconnect there.
With that one, I don't know if I completely agree, because I don't think that the white producers were all of a sudden like, the white studios were all of a sudden like, oh yeah, this would be a great idea. I feel like it was black people that championed it, you know, like the directors and I don't know who else, but I feel like it was when people started to talk about like, oh, black culture is actually cool. That's when they were like, okay, yeah, then let's go for this, because there's this whole market that we've not tapped into. Yeah. And I think it was that driving force that led to that, not necessarily them that came up with the bright idea to do it.
I disagree with that a little bit, and here's why. So think of it this way. Look at hip-hop culture. Hip-hop culture is the most influential culture in the world, right? In terms of its ability to influence what people dress, what people listen to, the poetry, all of that, right? But look at when hip-hop started, like in the 70s, right? And look at where it is now. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? How many hip-hop stars and artists that have come throughout the ages from back then till now actually own something of substance? How many of them own their masters? How many of them own companies, right? If you look at people that have really monetized hip-hop, it's people that don't look like us per se. Right? People that, and by that I mean people that own the actual rights to the hip-hop art itself. We're the ones that create the art, right? Same thing with Black Panther. The direction was created by a black director, right? The set
but it's based on a comic.
Right.
Right. I'm just gonna say, I'm just gonna nerd out for a second.
Go on.
The main reason they introduced it is because they were planning to get to Endgame, so they had to introduce Black Panther. So like, it wouldn't make sense if they didn't do it. They didn't start this with Iron Man, Spider-Man.
No, but you see, you're actually helping my argument here, because remember what I said? Foresight.
Yeah.
Foresight. That's my argument. You're able to see beyond today.
I don't think it was more a matter of like, let's create these opportunities. I think it was just we have the MCU, we need to get from point A to point B. You know, let's introduce Wakanda and Black Panther and all of that. I don't think they really, I don't want to give, I feel you want, they did a good job, but do we give them that much credit? And
I don't jump into that one. Like, I mean, there's foresights too, but then you also have to have, it's like, if you already have the established capital and power to be able to make those kind of, make things happen, and that, to me, that's why Black empowerment is important, because you need to be at the table to make these decisions.
Sure.
Yeah.
If there's only one person at the table and you're not opening the opportunities for other Black people, you are not going to be in the decision making. To me, actually, your point actually, to me, speaks to why we should be having Black empowerment. So, for example, like that's a perfect example. Or even something as simple as, say, real estate in Vancouver, for example. If you're not in the market, you won't have a say in terms of when things do and shift and things like that. And it's a very small example compared to like a model, for example, or just any industry. You have to be on the table, and if you realize, okay, these decisions are getting made by people that are not like me, do I have a moral obligation to bring up, not hand up, but like bring up people like me, so that we can come up with a coalition, whatever you want to call it. Not a coalition, but in sense of like decision making, be there when the decisions get made, and then you can actually have influence, and then you can actually have a Black studio that can make a decision like, hey, we're going to do this whole thing. But until then, but that's not what we need to do our work as well within ourselves to build each other up, and not just be like, oh, well, I'm here and these people have all the opportunities, I'm just going to do my thing. It's like, no, that's why I think there's a moral obligation, again, personally, that to be able to be at that level of making those decisions. And it doesn't necessarily have to tie to your Blackness, because that's a whole other thing where it's like, you want Black engineers, you want Black people in finance, you want Black bankers, but not just there, because so what's the opinion on diversity, Mr. Whatever?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because that's a whole other thing that happens.
But
you know?
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this is something that really is sort of, I guess, dear to my heart, is everybody saw what just happened with Nipsey Hussle, right?
Oh, yeah.
He is literally the gold standard for building your Black community, investing in your people, buying the real estate in your neighborhood, and he got killed by somebody from his own neighborhood, a Black person that looked exactly like him, right? So when we talk about creating opportunities, it's great, because clearly that's what he was. That was his life mission, was to create opportunities for himself, his family, and everybody around him. He was definitely, I think, the sort of the standard bearer for that, right? However, he got hurt by the exact same person from his community.
Yeah, but I mean,
So I'm just putting it out there, right? And so one of the reasons why I'm saying that is because sometimes there's a fear of going back and helping people from the same neighborhood where you grew up, because you might be successful, right? You might go and you might actually make it to different heights that people haven't attained from the neighborhoods you come from, right? And Kanye said something powerful actually in like an interview.
No. That's what you haven't heard in a long time.
Pre-2015?
Yeah, 2015. But like honestly, he talked about how classism versus racism, right?
Yeah.
About how classism is the biggest war that we're fighting as opposed to racism. And I thought that was an interesting comment. It was very incendiary, but it made sense in a way, because what he's really saying is people trust people that are from the same economic class as them, that speak like themselves, like that are educated like themselves. It's really a class thing, right? That's his argument, is that people make decisions on who to let into the room, based off of where you're coming from, right? Do you talk like me? Do you speak like me? Do you identify like me? Now it's less about race and more about what class you come from. That's his argument, right? And if you think about America, like 1960s to like now, I would make the argument that, you know, in the 60s there were clear laws that did not allow Black people to participate at all. Now it's, 50 years later, and those laws don't exist, right? But racism exists, we all know that, right? It's a real thing. But is it as much of an issue as it was back then? Probably not as much, because the world's more integrated. You've got the first African-American president that came into power. All these things have happened that have slowly helped change perceptions, right? And that people are people, right? Ultimately, class is often a much bigger dictator of like how people behave in many ways. I would argue that, because the neighborhoods you grow up in, the neighbors that you have, a lot of that's just linked to the economic class that you're in. Right? And then the opportunities that you want to give out.
I don't completely agree with that. And one example of that is Monique, for example. If we know about the whole Netflix thing.
Yeah.
So the argument was that she was offered $500,000 for a 2-year contract with Netflix. She can't do any stand-up. And she reached out to the Black community to say, stand with me and boycott Netflix, right? And her deal was crap. but Amy Schumer and all these other people who are also in the same class as her, because a lot of people would class Monique as a legend, a comedic legend.
Sure, yes.
But yet, why is it that, you know, a white woman who's a comedian in the same class as her got like 13 million, or if I'm not wrong, something in the millions, and she's getting 500,000 and cannot do other stand-up shows, cannot do anything? I think race played in that.
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
I don't doubt that. But I also think she was not as much of a box office draw as she thought.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
But
I
would say that her resume and what she could do in the future would be able to speak to that. Because someone like Dave Chappelle, who also got a lot of money for his Netflix special, he hadn't done a lot in the past few years either.
But if he wanted to,
Dave
he's
Chappelle's
still a big
Yes, but I'm saying like they based it off of his resume,
Yeah.
what he's done in the past.
Yeah, that's true.
So someone like Monique was selling out arenas too.
That's true. Oscars.
That's true.
And she had a lot of movies, Precious, all those other things, but it wasn't lining up with the same measurements that they used to
Her resume
measure.
is pretty deep. to be
Yeah,
I agree.
other-
I agree 100% with you.
I think it's past classism
Yeah.
and actually more race.
But hold on,
Right.
remember we talked about collaborations of black people supporting one another? I think the biggest issue with Monique is she pissed off the wrong people. Who did she piss off? Oprah, Tyler Perry, and Lee Daniels. Those are the three people who blacklisted her.
No, but you're making her point.
Exactly.
Because she's talking about classism. Because I think with black people a lot of times, when we talk about like, oh, invest, like, you know, build up and all these things, it becomes a matter of black capitalism, which I don't think is the solution to creating a more equal society. Because we talk about like, we see from the lens of like, we're living in a capitalist society, we're living in like a white dominated society. And capitalism is not, in the way it's set up, it's not meant to help us. It's meant to maintain a power structure, right? So if we're talking about like, oh, it's solely like, you know, it's just a class thing, let's just increase the minimum wage, let's just do all these things to like, make sure black people are making more money, that's not gonna solve people still having a racial bias. That's not gonna solve racism, you know? We still are going to have to struggle with living as a minority in a society which is white dominated, and we're still going to have to struggle with that. So that's an issue, that's important. But as you say, Oprah, billionaire, Lee Daniels, very rich, you know, producer, filmmaker. Tyler Perry, very rich. You know, they are basically part of the black bourgeoisie. They hold power, and they were able to reach that point by appealing to the white dominated capitalist society, and they've internalized a lot of those norms. So they became, because they've internalized that, they were able to be like, okay, Monique, you're not appeasing to us, you're not, you know, doing this free promotion for us, we're gonna blacklist you. They did that to her, and that in itself is a form of, it's a perpetuation of that classist, elitist, those actions which white people came up with. They do that to maintain their power, and Oprah and Lee Daniels and Tyler Perry continue that. So that goes again into like, it's not, class is an issue for sure, it's tied to race and all of that, but we need to move beyond like the black capitalist, like I'm tired of Jay-Z saying gentrify your own community, like no, that's not the solution. It's much deeper than that. We're looking at like, we're looking at being disadvantaged, and we're looking at living in a capitalist society. How do we come up with a solution which serves us in a better way, which we care about each other a lot more than just like how much money you have, and you know, making money is going to solve all your problems.
I'm happy you brought that up because like even in the black community, we find black people like going against each other, like Americans making fun of Africans, like we're both black, like what does that, like that doesn't make any sense. Like one time I had someone like ask me from the States, like would I consider myself a black person? I'm like, you know, which was crazy because I said I introduced myself as Nigerian, and because I'm from Canada, the person was assuming we didn't deal with the same struggles or whatever. Like, but like, it had no ill intent when she asked. But I just asked her the simple question. I'm like, looking from a distance, if I was walking down the street, would you be able to tell what kind of black I was? Would you be able to separate that? And like another like topic I like to touch on, because I'm a black person who grew up in Fort McMurray, so like by definition I'd be considered whitewashed or whatever like this. Like I still had that same situation, probably a little bit even worse because I didn't really have a lot of other black people to relate to growing up, right? So I had to like deal with people saying some crazy stuff all the time, and then find a way to make that funny. It's part of the reasons I became a comedian, because like I had to think on my toes all the time. Because how can I make you feel stupid for what you just said without looking like the angry black man? So like I had to find a way to maneuver that kind of stuff, because a lot of times I'd have to go home very upset, talk to my mom, and my mom was like, look, they just don't know. It's just what it is, Like that's what I mean. And again, even within the community, we have people like, always like, oh, we don't want to hang with him because he's too white, or like even the African community, like, oh, he grew up here, he doesn't know his culture, he's too white, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. Like the problem is a lot deeper than we like to admit. We're like still looking outside. We're not really looking on the inside first. If you guys get what I'm trying to touch on. So like we're being segregated by everybody else, and then we're also doing it to ourselves as well.
That's true.
Which is crazy, right? Like we have people. I have family in the States, and they just look at Africa. You would think a black person in the States would understand that. Calling an African African booty scratcher would be crazy, right?
Wow.
Why is that? Do you think that we still have that mentality where it's like there's the other type of black people?
It's the same reason why white people make black people like, oh, we're better than these guys, and people in the States, at least we ain't Africans. You know what I mean? This kind of sucks, but like I'm just trying to say, like, it's easy to look and judge from a distance, but like that's the same shit that everybody's doing. I'm not trying to define anybody. I'm just like speaking on my behalf. It ain't right. It's just like we need to all literally change the way we view each other. Right? Like,
it's an identity thing.
Yeah, and Africans, like, I don't want to be like out here poking at them, but Africans be like, yeah, we're educated. You guys don't know where you come from, that kind of stuff. It's so stupid. Right? Like, like my dad, like, I don't want to put my dad on blast. So you're talking rubbish about me. I have my parents on social media now, so I have to be very careful. My mom actually found me, like, so look, my mom been asking me to follow and saying, hey, this is where you be. This is where you be putting all that jokes. Well, my dad has this thing where like he would see like Americans like rapping and stuff like that. Like my dad, like he's a big fan of rap, like old school rap. Yeah, it's weird. Like he loves like Fela Kuti, the old guys, and then he loves like old school rap. But when he sees like the young kids, like even like from 50 generation on, he's like, oh, look at those niggas. Like I'm like, Dad, you can't say that. It's like, no, look at all this rubbish you're doing. Like you can't understand the oppression they've been through to get out of what they. I mean. And then my dad would use the the Nigerian thing. It was like, I came out of nothing. These guys have the opportunity, but there's still systemic oppression. Like schools that have zero funding. Like it's almost impossible. Where everybody in that neighborhood, the only way out is literally to probably sell drugs. Like you don't have any school, no dad, nothing in there. I'm like, Dad, yeah, we come from a place where education is valued. Like that is like your way out. If you don't want to be in Nigeria forever, you better read that book, kind of thing. Like, and then they're already in this place where there's still so much opportunities. There's no reason to be flying out of nowhere. So like their way out, their way to make money is either through basketball, through music, or through whatever the means. I mean, like there's ways to go to school and make that your way, but it's just not as popular. In Nigeria, the main way out is education. Education's pumped to your face. Like music, football. So Dad, how can you judge them for doing what they're doing? My dad was like, instead of them to read their book, I'm like, some schools don't even have books.
I was gonna say that's true. A whole lot of things there.
No, but that's why, like, to bring it all back in, that's why I think we need more black people in positions of power, and they need to be doing more to open up opportunities. Because that's how you change the power dynamics, where we don't have to. Then people don't have to fall to sports or arts. They can do anything they want. They have equal opportunities to go to school, get education, get a good job. They don't have to worry about systemic racism. They don't have to worry about bias in hiring. They don't have to worry about having this degree or not even getting to the school they want because of schools wanting to maintain certain levels of like white versus black and all these things, right? Like we need more. So how do we bridge that gap, right? I think that's really the only way.
Okay, so I want to touch on this because this is like it's a can of worms actually that we're opening up. So you said something very profound, which was this idea that everybody's looking for a way out. I think that therein lies the problem. I think where we've been failed the most as black people, and this is across the board from Africa to it really is leadership.
Yeah. 100%.
That's the fundamental issue I see.
Yeah.
It's like when somebody makes it, they become successful, they become the person that has an opportunity to then succeed and put on a lot more people. They make a decision, they choose either to do it or they choose not to, right? Or, for example, they succeed, in whatever endeavor. It could be sports, it could be entertainment. That's actually another issue as well, which is this idea that we can only succeed in sports and entertainment.
Yeah.
Right? Because it creates this sort of rat race where like all you think about is how can I play sports, right? For example, if you're in the States and you're thinking every successful person I know from my community has done this in order to get out, right? But the reason why you're looking to get out is because you don't see other opportunities around you.
Exactly.
Right? But why don't you see other opportunities around you? It's because from like a leadership perspective, there's no policy in place to say, hey, let me advocate for these people specifically, right? So I think on the advocacy side, it makes sense because like if you want to be a leader that empowers people, you have to create the space for them, right? But how do you do that? You could argue maybe quotas, right? Having like explicit rules that say you must, allocate this number of spots in a room, right, for black people, right?
100%.
But I also believe that there's a certain problem with that because oftentimes, and I see this having grown up in Zimbabwe, I see this all the time, whereby we'll create, opportunities or we'll create lists and quotas, but then we lower standards. I don't believe in lowering standards. Because what that does is it sets you up with the burden of low expectations. And to me, that's one thing my father always told me is if you want to stop a person from succeeding in life, give them low expectations. That's it. Like nothing else. Don't impede their mental capacity or anything. Just tell them that they cannot do better or that they can't do it. And it basically stops them in their tracks. Because the moment you lower the bar, it becomes very tricky to raise that bar again. Right?
Yeah.
It's all about expectations and standards.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, you could go. I feel like I've talked.
Yeah, I mean, no.
Yeah.
I think just there's a whole lot of things, but I think with that, I mean, I think part of the problem too is a lot of times these quotas, it's almost like they're like shortcuts to solving the problem, so to speak. Because if there's a reason where there's a fundamental discrepancy between black students or whatever versus white students, whatever, people need to whoever the people, I'll get to that, go into like what are the fundamental causes for this disparity. Too often people don't want to do that work, they just like quotas. And then it can also be weaponized against black people, like, well, we lowered the bar for you black people, or vice versa. But I think there needs to be a lot of work to be done as to understanding the whys. The why. Why is, why, even for example, part of what you were saying about some people, some African parents, maybe they're like, how come these black people, there's all these opportunities? But if you kind of understand some of the cultural and historical context, not to make excuses, but just to have a larger pool of information for you to come up with your hypothesis, so to speak. I'm talking like nerdy now, but that's just the way things work. And like, I didn't, like for example, redlining, like growing up in Nigeria, I didn't know what redlining was in the States or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So that's one thing that, not saying that racism is bad or is as worse as bad as it was before, whatever it is, but like the effects of something like redlining in terms of creating wealth and things like that till today, that's a real thing. Whether we admit it or not, that's a real thing. So the point I'm trying to make to that is like, I see what you're saying about the lowering bars, but you have to go deeper as to like what's the education system like, or what are the causes, and what are the barriers of entry for, again, black students in this case, to reach this standard. And then first of all, like, is this standard that we're using, is that actually fair? Who came up with these? There's so many questions that you can start with questions. You can question it all, like, you know what I'm saying? So I think I see what you're saying, but you also have to kind of hold that loosely, like, why? Okay, so sure, you can drill the bucket, why is it that's the case? Then go further, as opposed to like, well, if you lower, they're just not going to make it anymore. It's like you have to keep digging further if we want to, but it involves a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of time. It's very nuanced. It's very difficult. So sometimes it's just like, man, that's a lot for one person to take, and then you're like, I'm just gonna go do my thing, right? And that's why I think there needs to be spaces for people who have some sort of social capital, whatever that looks like. Again, I don't think you can mandate people to do anything because that just doesn't work. But you have to kind of have it in you, just like you want to do it, and then encourage each other. I mean, you can mandate to a certain degree, for sure. Let me take that back. You can mandate it for sure, but it's a mixture of mandate and also people's desire to kind of, that's kind of, it's a good point,
For me, growing up, my dad has always said, if I ever wanted a position that a white person is going for, I need to be 3 times or 4 times better.
Right.
And honestly, it sucks. It's just the life that, like, I was raised in a way, like, my dad just raised me like, this is the situation. There's no need to complain about it. You know, you need to be 4 times better. So if you can't get 4 times better, then I failed. You know, that's the way I was raised.
Though.
I know it's a problem.
Yeah.
But like, will I sit and complain about the problem, or will I bring myself to the next level because I believe in myself, right?
Yeah.
So like, in terms of even comedy, man, I'm literally the only black person doing it. Like, I had to grind myself to like get to where I was, man. Like my girlfriend knows, like I'd be out till like the middle of the night to make sure everybody can see. I need to make sure I was working harder on being the best in what I do. You know what I mean? Like not to because when you talk about lowering the bar kind of stuff, it kind of sparked that conversation I had with my dad. So a lot of black people, I feel like I'm gonna say, I might even get in trouble for this, but like you just need to prepare to like die for that finish line. You know what I mean? So like you already know like we're being discriminated against. So how about we buckle our boots up and be like, you know what? I'll give you no reason not to give me the job, or no reason to not put me in the position.
That's still not enough.
I know, but sometimes money is money still. You know what I mean?
So, but then the thing becomes like, we know this.
Yeah.
Generations of us have been working so hard to get these opportunities.
Yeah.
Are we still going to continue to accept the state of things? Or are we going to be like, okay, this system is not made for me. Why don't I take myself out of it and create a new system, which is for me, right? Then it's hard.
It's not as easy as that. Because everybody has to come together to do that.
I'm saying we don't start our own country.
Yeah, that's like, so someone was saying let's all move to Africa.
Isn't what Issa Rae is doing, isn't that a form of that? She's created a production company, which features mostly black or like almost predominantly black people. Like, of course, like it's still within Hollywood, which is a white dominated space, but she's doing what she can, right? So I'm not saying like just a total like overhaul of everything, like, because that's probably not gonna happen because it just in sheer numbers and like how much power is held in white spaces, like it's really hard to do that. But in terms of just opening your own platforms, doing what you can to bring people up.
Exactly.
I think that should be a thing. Like, as you say, like it may not be mandated in law, but personally, I feel like we should be doing it.
I feel like it's a personal obligation, not a requirement.
Especially if you see these things happen. If you see it and you know it's happening, and you don't do it, you don't do what you can to make things better. I can't help but side-eye you. I feel like, damn, Virgil, like, not to name call, but like, he's from Ghana, like, that's, that's my guy, like, I'm Ghanaian, like, I was very proud to see how, like, I was like, oh, damn, like, like, that's what's up. And I saw him post a picture of his design team as all white, and I'm just like, yeah.
But ask yourself this question, David, right? Because I think one thing you touched on, which got me thinking really hard, was just this idea of mistrust, or even like us not necessarily collaborating as much as we could or should.
Sure.
Right? And I think a lot of that is linked to just people's lived experiences and then also the history behind it, right? So Ray touched on it, like you have to go deeper, you have to go deeper to the root. And the way I look at it, what's consistent across a lot of the African American, Black American experience, like just generally, right? It's this idea of you have like communities that are disjointed. And why are they disjointed? Because some way, somehow, either colonialism came in, or maybe there was slavery in this case, right? That came in and basically disjointed communities, right? Same thing with like the creation of countries. Why are there 53 or 54 countries in Africa? It's because a whole bunch of lines were drawn at a conference in Berlin where there was nobody at the table that looked like a black person, right? Like nobody played a role in that. So in my mind, it's like you've got this history where all of a sudden everybody's siloed. Right? And then you go to the States, everybody's silent, right? Because then you've got people that were put onto fields, they were killed, they were told, we're gonna lynch this person alive, and if you try and rebel, this is what's gonna happen to you, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, what happens years and years later when it's time for people to integrate, collaborate, do all these things? There's still that element of mistrust, which you would think by now, like, would sort of dissipate, but it exists in all communities, right? In all communities. And it's not even like overt, right? It's this idea that, okay, let me just stick to what I know. And if it's Virgil, maybe Virgil, sticks to what he knows because that's what he knows.
I know Virgil grew up around all like
Right?
If you're in that position, you know what's happening, do what you can, you know, like it's simple. Like you don't have to do some like massive, you know, you don't have to pay everyone's student loans off like that billionaire did, but just do something, you know, and don't do something which puts other black people down.
All I'm saying is, remember what I said before, like you can be the champion of the people, but you can get shot like Nipsey. Nipsey was the champion of the people.
No, but for
there's no better example.
There's like 500.
But my point is, like, when you see a shining star that's shot, like you're looking at a star that's shot, it's painful because you're like, man, this guy literally did as much as he could.
That's true.
Right? But like, I struggle to see any other rapper that's done more than that man has in terms of
me too.
For community. I have not seen it. Right. So it's like when it's I think it was Steve Harvey said this the other day in an interview. He's like, we can't have tomorrow if we keep killing our todays. Right? And I thought that was very profound. I was like, oh wow, like basically what we're doing is we're not allowing ourselves to see the future. Like that Foresight thing, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I question you quoting Steve Harvey because I think he's problematic too. Because just bringing Monique back up, when she was arguing for her right and like what she thought she deserved, he was like, Monique, that's not how you do it. You're the bigger, you know, black woman. You need to talk in, you know, small voices, and you know that's kind of what he meant. So
I disagree with Steve on that one.
Like that's the thing. It's like we say that, oh yeah, we have to be loud in fighting for what we want and for black people coming up, but at the same time you have to play this game still because we're not the majority. And so you have to like find that fine balance, and I think that's where a lot of people just at some point they just want to give up and be like, I made it. Okay, let me just like I need to look out for my family at this point. Like because if I rock the boat, then I'm gonna be on the side. Who am I gonna help? You know.
So like what I'll say, I'll amend it because I know I go a little bit like extreme, but like, I'll amend it to say I'll amend it to say you don't have to do something to help others. Like I don't think, especially if it's hard or like I want to be sensitive to people's situations and like be like, okay, like if you're in like a job and you're trying to like, you just got in and it's like a precarious position and you know, I get that. But just don't do things which shut doors down. And that's where like I will be more passionate about like looking at, you know, people like Virgil and Kanye, like what they do and be like, no, like that's wrong. So I'll amend it to say that. The bare minimum, just don't do that. Anything else is extra, that's cool. But like,
So the crabs in the barrel.
That's what
I think another thing we haven't even touched on is just consumerism. How many black people know where to buy everything? Think about everything we're wearing. How many of us know where we can buy the same products that we're wearing right now on our bodies that are created by another black person?
It's hard.
Like how many people actually know? Like for example, you own a clothing line? Is that okay? Let's talk about that. Right? Like how do we make sure we're consuming more of those things? Because at the end of the day, right? Like I look at it from an economic perspective. You also did econ, right? The circular flow of income. One person's consumption is another person's income, right? So I gotta spend for you to eat. You gotta spend for me to eat, and that's how the world goes around, right? So until we can actually say like, you know, these are all the options in front of us, because the options are there. It's just it's not easily accessible, or in a way that we can easily sort of not just access, that we can easily interact with, right? That's really I think one of the keys is just awareness is one, and the other piece is just the convenience of it, being able to access it easily.
And everybody who loved to support the black situation, but then when it's time to support the black situation, everybody kind of like pieces out on it. So like to get out of where we are, we need help from allies, outside people who aren't black, which is just, you know, the way it is. Because, you know, to be able to climb out of that barrel, like I was speaking out, you need an outside hand to pull you out.
Yeah, true. I'm always kind of like...
No, because...
I see what you're saying. You see what I mean? Like, I get what you're saying. When I hear help, I kind of cringe a little bit.
Yeah, like...
Maybe advocate.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not saying...
But it's because it's, I think, that's what I was saying, like there's a personal responsibility, like as an individual, and then that goes into like a community level, and like again, back to what you were saying, it's been so fragmented and fractured, it's like, do we see what we're buying into? Like, even like, say black culture, like if you're like, oh yeah, if you have this us versus them mentality, then it makes it harder to even just come up with like a consensus to be able to like, okay, let's empower and provide opportunity, right?
Exactly.
I think we should also, as Black people, stop asking each other for discounts.
I know. Thank
And
you.
I'm preaching to myself on that. Buy the full price. Thank you for watching another episode of Unbox.
If you like what you watch, be sure to check us out on the full uncut version of each episode, now available on our audio podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, and Anchor.
And you can also find us on Facebook and on Instagram at Unboxedshow. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Okay, bye.
Bye.